All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode of the London is Blue podcast. Associates Brand, Joe McCoast, Nick, and Dan. And gentlemen, we've got the 2023-2024 Men's Season Awards and Ratings, one that I think everybody kind of looks forward to at the end of the season, mainly because there's a lot to break down. It's a time of reflection, Dan. It is a time of picking out moments that are probably well forgotten for most supporters and fans out there. And so we can rewind a little bit.
We have the 51st annual Oz Goodies brought to you by the London is Blue podcast crew, getting into it in a two-part special, which is even better because amidst all the drama and chaos that is Chelsea, it is a wonderful opportunity to look back at the highs and the lows of last season, of which there were many of both. And I'm sure as we get through this, Nick, there'll be plenty of moments that make people laugh, cry, feel emotion, feel despair, and everything in between.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think we like doing these end of season specials because it's, I think, one helpful for posterity's sake when you look back on these. If you ever wanted to go look back, we do these at the end of every season. You can kind of get some context for the different seasons, how they ran, and it's nice to just take a 30,000 foot view of the season, not be so in the moment in every single match in the stats. So this is a bit of a bigger take on everything that's going on. And it's happening at a crucial time, Brandon, as the club is going through yet more transformation at the end of the season.
Yeah, get excited for all of this to be immediately irrelevant as the club make many more changes to whatever it is we're going to call Chelsea FC next season. My wild prediction, we probably have a basketball team. We become a sporting club, I think is where we're going with this, maybe cricket or squash. But look, we're going to do our best here to get into it. And why not kick it off with a 3-word season review? If you think a 3-word match review is hard, season review, completely impossible. So, Dan, good luck with this one.
Look, PSR, but not the PSR you're thinking of. Pretty soft resolve. This team capitulated in a lot of terrible moments this season and ultimately should have done better than they did in a lot of areas on and off the pitch. So hopefully we are not using a similar 3-word season review at the end of the 2024-25 season, Nick.
Some PSR is our problem. Thankfully, the financial one is not, Nick. What about you?
Yeah. TBD on that one, by the way. I started the season off with our season preview, giving my 3-word preview as fun but frustrating. My 3-word season review is funny and frustrating. It was both. There were moments that did your head in. There were moments that, there was some levity attached to it. It was a weird old year, Brandon. Lots happened. I know most of our journalist friends kind of categorize this as a season that happened in 2 halves. I think it happened in more than that. I think the pizza pie was split up in more than just 2 halves.
For sure. And if you're eating pizza by the half, I think there's a problem with that. So that makes sense. I think we're good with that. Yeah.
That's just a calzone at that point,
It really is. Hey, look, I put happy open ending on this one. It was going well, but then why not completely stop all forward momentum and hit start over? So yeah, happy open in brackets ending. It was fun while it lasted, which was about 3 weeks. So anyways, a huge shout out to everybody who's left 5-star reviews at Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Again, helps us be discovered, especially during the crazy summertime. Get to YouTube. Editor Jake and team doing a lot on that front. You can subscribe there. And then the London's Blue Dispatch, Sam continuing to pump those out every single week. If you would like written content on Chelsea, that's where to go for free. And then lastly, the best Chelsea group in the world, our Discord, the best friends you never knew you needed. Join up there. Just a few bucks a month will get you access to so much. But we got to jump in, gentlemen. It is the season overview and assessment of Clear Lake's season numero dos. All right. They're no longer rookies, no longer excuses. But let's go ahead, Dan, and review what we said last season so we can compare to this season.
Yeah, as good of a sequel as Too Fast, Too Furious, if we're talking about second season.
Hey, that was a blockbuster. You shut your mouth.
Within the Fast and Furious franchise canon, definitely not a top one of the.
Was that the one with Ja Rule? Oh, come
Aren't they
on.
all?
What a class. No, not all of
Come on.
them.
Anyway, in this season, Chelsea appointed and kept a manager for the entirety of the season. We said, no, we're not going to do 3 managers in a season. They said, hey, we're going to make the US Summer Tour a little less chaotic. It still had some chaos, but it was not as bad as the prior year. And then Chelsea continued to bring in a slew of promising young players. And when you kind of think about on pitch performance in general, it was all on aggregate better than the prior season.
Yeah, look at this. We had 7 more wins in the league, right? 2 less draws and 5 less losses. So, that's good. We went from 12th to 6th. I think that's very nominal. And the FA Cup, obviously losing to the semifinal to Man City. Last year, we drew City in the third round, which was an auto loss, especially the way that season was going. In the League Cup, we obviously got to the final, lost to Liverpool in extra time. Might surprise you in case you forgot, we also lost to City in the third round to the League Cup. Last season was tough. Obviously, no European soccer either season. So, with that being said, Nick, the overarching thing is 6 to 12 with a cup final. Those are the biggest differences compared to last year. So, how are you scoring the on pitch performance for this squad?
Well, I mean, we're recording this the day after Manchester United beat Manchester City in the FA Cup final and thus snatching a Europa League place from our grasp at the very last moment in the dumbest possible fucking way. And so I think if we were recording this and the opposite had happened, my score would be a 7.5 based on where we put the season and where my expectations were, frankly. I thought we'd finish sixth. We finished sixth, but we didn't do enough. You especially think about the results at the end of the season against Sheffield United and Burnley. I go back to those. I know I've harped on those. You're probably tired of hearing me harp on those results. But if you win both those games, which you absolutely should have, you're easily in fifth, and that game in the FA Cup final doesn't matter at all. And it's those fine margins that I have a 6 out of 10 ranking now, because I think there was some really good stuff that happened. Young players did gel at the end of the season. There was some positive momentum. The first half of the season, though, if you rewind your brain, was a fucking disaster. I mean, it was really bad, and we were struggling to get into 10th place at one point. If you scratch your memory up, so that's my 6 out of 10. I think it was decent, but too inconsistent.
Small marginal improvement off your 0 out of 10 last season. So,
Yeah, I was not a happy boy at the end of last season.
hey, understandable. Look, I also went 6, not to bandwagon here, but the last 5 matches don't make up for the draws that you just mentioned, Nick. We lost to Wolves twice. Our only big wins, quote unquote, were like Newcastle early, Everton, right? Like we had some good cup results and things like that, but overall, I mean, we got pumped by Liverpool, pumped by Arsenal. Thank gosh we got the red card and the penalties against Spurs early in the season. It's just there wasn't a lot to kind of rally around. So I would say like this is just under what we expect for Chelsea, and that's why I have it at a 6, Dan.
You could make the argument, though, Brennan, that our biggest wins were draws against City, Arsenal, and Liverpool. Like,
100%. Yeah. And again, like, is that where we want to be? Are we always on the road? Like, drawing, would we split with United, who ended up having a pretty poor season? So, yeah, I think like those rallying victories just weren't there. I mean, we'll talk more about individual matches later on, but yeah, it's you know, draws are where we're at, right? Button down the hatches, play like a small team.
Well, I think it's also about where you're setting the floor and what your expectation is. And so I think in my mind, the floor is you should be in a Europa League qualification spot at a minimum for Chelsea in every single season you compete in the Premier League. You should be in a cup final or in the advanced stages in multiple cup runs. And so I actually went a little lower, just not by much, with a 5 out of 10. Last season was a 1 out of 10, and that one was basically just we didn't get relegated. And, um, and so like that was a base expectation. But I mean, you're talking about small margins, Nick. I mean, 5 points puts you level with Aston Villa and 4th spot, and the goal difference wasn't too drastically different between the two sides. And so we're talking about small margins, where Chelsea should be, what the expectation should be of this club. you know, we barely scrape by at, I think, what a base expectation for a season is, even with a lot of extenuating circumstances. And so could have been better. It could have been drastically better, but I think there's plenty to build from next season, which is nice.
Yeah, as long as we can keep the momentum from the end of the season, which is now hugely up in the air, and we'll have to see. So, anyways, go ahead and take our first ad break. Thank you to the sponsors. When we get back, we're going into grades, right? Manager grades and some of the end of season awards. Thank you to the sponsors, and we'll be right back. All right. Well, not only do we have to, talk about the club holistically and things like that, but the manager grade, right? And I think Poch is really stands for Poch and his assistants, right? His crew there. The listeners came in at just under 6.5, which really split all of us. So, Dan, you were the closest. I'll let you kind of lead off how you viewed Poch's one and done.
It's interesting because I wonder if we had recorded this and done the survey before Pochettino had actually been let go, if it would have been higher or lower. Because I think there has been a little extra sympathy that has been poured out to him from some elements of the Chelsea supporter base. I think there's also people who are like, yeah, couldn't make it another season, and like there's like the seesaw is awesome going up and down. I think he did well enough. He got us across the line in the end. I think there was a lot of opportunity. The training regimen and the injury considerations about his training methodology and how that put our players at risk is a huge element of it. The use of subs or lack thereof at points in the season, the inability when the chips were against him and injuries were mounting that he didn't go to the academy or players like Alfie Gilchrist a little more across the season. And there was a lot of could have done more, could have done more, could have done more, could have done more. I think it shades up to a 6 for me out of 10 because of how we ended the season. If we had not gone on that run, particularly after the Arsenal loss, could have easily been, I think, a 4 or 5. You need to win something at Chelsea, in my mind, to be even in that like 7 range, that 7-8 range.
Yeah, I went with a lower grade slightly, 5.5. I think this grade was impacted by the fact that we did not control our own destiny at the end of the season, and thus now are not in Europa League when there were many, many, many instances we're talking about small margins, and that's probably going to be a theme as you go through this entire end of season special here. To get Europa League, like if we had gotten Europa League and he had elected to mutually part ways with Chelsea Football Club or whatever the hell the company line is, I think I would have given him a 7. The fact that we didn't get there, I think, drops him down a 1.5. I think there are concerns about injuries. Now, Matt Law came out last week. Nazar has said this too, that injuries are not a one person or a coaching staff problem. It's an entire club holistic problem. And so, that's just something to keep in mind. But, he is a part of that for sure. And, there were many, many times where, it seesawed too much, where our tactics and our game plan was really good. And then our tactics and game plan, Brandon, were really, really bad. And we got cut open and we're way too open defensively for most of the year. Gave up a historic goal haul on the defensive side. So, yeah, 5.5.
I think I probably was most generous at 7 because of all the extra things that he had to deal with. Again, injuries is tough because he's probably plays a part in it, but I think a lot of it was, not down to him. The other thing I kind of like lean in his favor was again, like kind of how we ended the season and how the players were galvanized, and there was a lot of our young players who were finally playing with confidence. I think once he was, mutually let go, a lot of those players who we need next season posted very public messages in support of him too. So I'm also thinking of the continuation for next season to be like, all right, if we spent all this time building and trying to, get these players galvanized and confident, we just did it with one person. Now they have to do it with a whole nother relationship. So I think if he were told to like, hey, you need to build this team for multiple years, and he spent all season building versus maybe being more cutthroat and only playing for results, I think he would have done it different. So again, I'm kind of giving him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, but there's no argument there that, like, the results and how we set up against some of the big teams and things just was not there. But he also didn't really build the squad. So I balanced it out a little bit. That's why I think I was a lot more harsh on the club than Poch. But I know a lot of people don't agree,
Yeah.
and that's okay.
No, I think it's a fair enough point too, right? Like he was not, and the club has now made this very clear that the manager is simply there to just coach on the field. Like
Mhm.
they don't control transfers. They don't get really a say. Whatever collaboration fucking me. It sounds like they're gonna just make a choice, and the manager just has to give it a thumbs up. Like I think it's a fair analysis.
Yeah.
McKinsey FC, my man. That's where we're heading.
Not wrong. AIFC might be the new one. All right. Well, let's go ahead to the transfer business. And if you've forgotten, the amount of outgoings last season was historic. We did enough outgoing business for 3 clubs combined. I talked a lot with Matt about this and how it went. But if you were to give the score for incomings and outgoings combined, the listeners came in at 6.5 with just under half shooting for a 7. So that kind of gives you an idea where, like, 40% of respondents gave it a 7. Everybody, the rest of 60% were more of a spectrum. Look, we did have plenty of incomings and we spent a lot of money. But again, I'm a little bit more excited, Dan, about how we did on the outgoings.
Mhm.
We really cleared our deck. I think for the most part, nothing is massively regrettable. Some of the loans we chose that were on the outgoings, I think are going to pay off. But how are you framing all of this?
Yeah, I think the outgoing business does deserve a lot of credit because there were definitely some deals that we got out of that, like, the Kai Havertz deal, even though he comes back to score against us in the Arsenal match in general, didn't help them win the Premier League. So completely fine in the
Wah,
context
wah,
of it.
wah, wah.
Uh, but there obviously were a lot of deals they had inherited as an ownership group that they had to resolve and fix. Some of them were of their own making, like Koulibaly, that they had to go out and address too. So I think where I lean on it being a 6 out of 10 is that, like, we did get legit additions in addition to doing all that outgoing business, right? Caicedo, Gusto, Palmer, really, really strong additions. You could argue Jackson is very promising, has full potential for next year as well, too. So, like, you do have some really good components of the squad that we're taking next season who are going to be better because they have full Premier League seasons under their belts at Chelsea. Caicedo obviously has a full one with Brighton. Sales were strong. We brought in a couple players, but we also, like, negotiated terribly. We got backed into corners on Caicedo and on Lavia. Lavia did not feature outside of 38 minutes this entire season. So, like, in my mind, we are in situations where now there's still reckoning coming for the business that we have done and we have yet to do. And so I think that's where Nick, I couldn't go too much higher than that, but I am excited by some of the players we bought, even if 2 to 3 years from now we'll look back and Caicedo will only be like the 20th most expensive player instead of being the most expensive Premier League player.
Yeah, I was pretty low on this. Like just after evaluating everything, like I think the outgoings were better than the incomings, which I suppose it needed to happen that way. Still, if you look at Lukaku still being technically on our books, Ziyech still technically being on our books, not figuring out what you're doing with Broya, and that was a bad loan. Uh, you know, Fafana bouncing around to a couple places. I think there were a couple that were decent in here on the outgoings, but you really, you got a bunch of money for Mason and Kai, obviously, that helped out, and Kovacic and the like. But you look at the attackers, and I put this in the note here. If I'm being honest, we hit on 4 of 13. Like really truly hit. Like Cole Palmer hit. Caicedo hit. You look at, I would put Petrovic as a hit for his fee, especially. And I think my last one
And Kunku.
was Jackson.
Mm.
I don't know if Nkunku's a hit yet. I have no fucking clue. and I think that's just something that we're gonna have to talk about as we go. So I have it as 4.5. I think I'm pretty down on the business. I don't. There's not a whole lot of contributors in here. I don't know who Ugochukwu is going to end up being. I don't know if David Washington's ever going to play for us. Same with Angelo. Same with Diego Moreira. Axel Disasi, mid to me. Lavia, no clue. Like I think there's just too many question marks for me to give them anything more than a 4.5.
So I was like editing in real time on this one because I'm low on the sporting directors. So I have to be careful saying this on all the podcasts and then coming back and potentially giving them a higher grade than I wanted. And so how I framed this was outgoings, great, right? Like great business, like the right players left, right? Like obviously we like Mason, but if he had the injuries he had this season with us, then like in hindsight, that was pretty lucky. That was pretty beneficial, but I will still always appreciate Mason for who he is and everything he's done. Outside of that, like, did we lose too much? I don't think so. Right. So like, hey, well done to really clear the books. But the incomings, if the line from Todd and Igbali to the sporting directors was Champions League, they didn't do it. They did not build a squad to get into the Champions League through Premier League table because that was our only way in this season. I think they got probably unlucky with Nkunku's injuries because the team was essentially built around him. So they put all their eggs in that basket. Cole ended up taking that responsibility and bailing them out. But Nico Jackson was never going to be ready. To your guys' point, Lavia, Disasi, like we took a lot of gambles. And you don't get to gamble when it comes to setting the stage at Champions League. And I think to me, that's why I ended up coming in at a 5. Look, are we going to have a squad potentially for the next 5, 6, 7 seasons? I think so. But again, what are we doing? Is it a win this season or is it a win in 5 seasons? They let Poch go because, we didn't meet thresholds and how they viewed it. So I think they're all over the place and they're disconnected. This squad is one for the future, not one for today. So, I think they're disconnected on that.
This transfer window will be interesting to look back at 3 to 4 years from now and say, in retrospect, in hindsight, with all of the information, with multiple years of these individuals hitting their prime, how many are still at Chelsea, how many are contributing at a high level as starters at Chelsea, how many are rotational, and how many have moved on. And maybe that's a fun exercise we'll get into over the summer with some of the other previous transfer windows, because that could be some good edutainment for people.
No doubt. All right. The next one we have, so obviously, we did the on pitch. How did the team compete in the league and the competitions we're in? All right. Then we did the manager. All right, great. Now we did the transfers, which is really the sporting directors. It is time to have the club, right? The ownerships and the front office and the people doing the rest of the business. How did they do? Right? The ownership have been building their team for a while now. How have they done? I will tell you, I gave them a 4. Constant changes, medical department still a disaster, commercial failures all season long, unless you count, I don't even remember what that Plaid movie is now.
Argyle?
Argyle. See, that worked well. They are trusting people to build a squad not capable of achieving Champions League. And the only bright star I felt like was the amount of investment that went into the women's team that directly had on-field success. And obviously this isn't a women's episode or an academy, because I think the academy had success too, but like it's interesting how those two are very different. I think it probably comes down to a strong leader at the top. So overall, the stadium season ticket prices are going up. I'm not seeing a lot of exciting progression, especially based on kind of when they bought the club, the things that they were going to prove. I feel like Jurasek is like the third CEO or like the third commercial officer. It doesn't seem anything to stick on that side of it. So anyways, that's where I'm at. I know, Dan, you're about the same. So I don't know if there's anything different that you want to pull out.
I think I would go a layer deeper on the commercial end of it, because Chelsea is and will continue to be, at least for the short term, one of the most recognizable Premier League clubs, one of the most recognizable football clubs in the world. I living in New York now, I can't tell you the amount of times that I run across somebody just walking down a random street that has a Chelsea kit on. I saw actually a brilliant Commodore one the other day.
Ooh.
And yeah, it's really, really good throwback. And so to have played games without a sponsor on the front of the kit, to have been in a situation which Nick is adorned and showing off for those who are watching the YouTube video.
Wearing my sponsorless shirt, Dan. It feels great.
I know. To not have secure Champions League football and have the Jordan brand push down their selection of a London-based club for another season. Just there's so much opportunity, and the inability to actualize against it is actually dumbfounding. And again, I have not negotiated deals in the tens of millions of dollars, so I will caveat my experience appropriately. But I do think there's an opportunity to do so much more. The stadium, the way we communicate with supporters from the top, top down, there's so much that can be done. And I think we have to continue to draw a higher line of expectation from the club to hopefully continue to see progress in the way that they engage. Because I think the other point that you made, Brandon, the ticket prices, like, that to me is like the last thing I would want to try to touch if I ran Chelsea. I would want to squeeze every single commercial partnership I could find underneath the sun before I would touch match day ticket prices. And I would want to figure out then how to get the stadium done as soon as possible in a way that's amenable to the supporters too. And I know, Nick, you were a little higher than us, but not by much.
Yeah, I had it at 5, so still failing grade. And they failed by their own standards that they claim to set. So, I don't view this as harsh or not. They said that they wanted to be competitive. They wanted to be in Europe. They wanted to win stuff. We were in one final, could have been in another, and didn't ever compete in the league for anything. And so, all the stuff that you guys said, a mess. I would go deeper on the fact that they're self-proclaimed, the former ownership didn't run the club well commercially, structurally, or whatever that phrase was. They've done worse than that, and more than anything, they've really, really been poor in communicating about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and it's caused a huge rift with the fans. I mean, there could be no doubt about that. So, yeah, it's a 5, and I don't know if it's going to get better anytime soon.
All right, we're going to take our last ad break ahead of the awards, but we've got plenty. So thank you to sponsors, and we'll be right back. All right, many awards. And look, you could call this the Cole Palmer show, but we've tried to be a little bit creative so we can, get this done in a way that's not just boring. So, as we always do, leading with player of the season. We really didn't have one last year. So this year, picking a name was a little bit more, I'd say, unanimous, right? With Cole Palmer. There's no doubt about that one. I went with Captain Connor just because I felt like he was the glue, but there's no doubt that Cole was the one who gave us any sort of success on the pitch. Like, Nick, how do you view Cole's debut season with Chelsea? Deadline day signing nonetheless.
11 out of 10. Top. The guy is really, really cemented himself not only at the top of Chelsea's pecking order, but I think at the top of the league's pecking order. I mean, that's how influential this season was. And I think there's some anxiety out there already about, like, oh, is he going to have a sophomore slump? Is he going to not perform as well next year? Like, that's how high the standard is that he's just set for himself. So if, by that standard, even if he gets 25 goal and assists in all comps, like, that will feel like a failure. And we've gone a couple of years without having a player who could do that. So, the fact that you have a real special superstar player here is awesome, and he is definitely deserving of player of the season.
It's nice to have a on-pitch assassin in the team again who can take a game by the scruff of its neck and turn it around. And I think it just gets you more excited to see what he's going to do in that second season as Chelsea look to reinforce, as we, can, at least as of today, on time of recording on the 26th of March, before a manager appointment has been made, we can dream that it is a manager that we are excited about who comes in, who can further capitalize on his initial season. I think if I had to give it to someone else, I probably would have given it to Connor's. Probably the right choice. Nico would have been in the shout too. Just, going from La Liga to the Premier League is a massive step up, and to match and exceed kind of his contribution last season and in this season, pretty impressive too.
Yeah, the main reason I put Connor was, one, Cole can be a young player. Connor's a vet now, but the other thing is he's had to self-sacrifice so much so to fill gaps for everyone else to succeed. I'm just kind of giving him that nod. But then, like you said, the young player of the season, U23, it's Cole by a million still, right? Like again, he could sweep all of these awards. But Nick, I did like your kind of backup shout of another young player that was new to the league and had a good debut season.
Yeah, I have my own personal rule on these awards that if you're a young player and you win the player of the season, that someone else should get the young player of the season. It's just like, I think the point's been made by winning player of the season that you're really good. So if Cole wins player of the year, and he already has at the club level, I would give it to Malagusto. Malagusto was exceptional for a large chunk of the season. Not perfect, not always great, but really, really, really good. And, I think for a part of the season was a huge component of our offensive attack. You think about the way he was able to break press, advance the ball up the field to Cole Palmer, distribute the ball effectively with crosses and cutbacks. Really, really, really top player. Looking forward to seeing him evolve.
So the next one we had is most improved. And this is actually a little bit funny because when you ship out 40 players, there's not a lot of players that can be most improved from last year. So I was kind of struggling and laughing about this as well, because it's like, well, you really have a handful of players. And then when you take in like all the injuries, like Reece James missing most of the season, Trevo missing most of the season, guys that were here last season, some of them didn't even really feature either. So this was a bit tricky. But Dan, you picked someone who wasn't even here last season. So hey, go ahead, bring it out here, lay it on me.
Yeah, so I went with a first half of the season versus compared to second half of the season, and so that's why I gave it to one, Nico Jackson. Look, 9 of 17 of his goals came in the back half of the season. Actually, came from February forward, so post AFCON, and then you had 4 of 6 of the assists that he had across all competitions that came from that time too. He went a 17 game run in that period too, without picking up any cautions. And he effectively added 1,200 additional minutes season over season. So he went from 1,600 minutes playing in La Liga to going and playing 2,800 minutes, effectively as we thought you were going to be a guy, but you had to be the guy for a significant period of time. And there was a large learning curve in that first 10 to 15 match run for one Nico Jackson, getting a really rough education in the Premier League. But the way he ended the season, a lot of promise, a lot of potential. You can see him as a part of this Chelsea attack heading into next year and next season. So yeah, I gave it to Nico, but I think the listeners with 41% saying Conor Gallagher. That's also a really, really great shout too.
Yeah, that was where I went with this is Connor. Like, I just think he took on so much more responsibility than he ever anticipated. Remember, he was third in line for the captaincy at the start of the year, right? James gets hurt, Chilwell gets hurt. Connor's captain for what, 30 of the 38 games or something like that, which is exceptional. And then just his play overall. You think about where he started the season, the more advanced role. The last 10, 12 matches of the season, when Enzo gets hurt, he has to drop back and play a completely different role. Brandon in the six really stood out to me as one of our best players in that stretch. Seemed to help Caicedo evolve as a player as well. I can't say enough good things about Connor. And this is not like he had a bad last season by any means. I thought he was one of our bright spots in a season full of really, really bad stuff. But it was like it went from a 5 to an 8. That's where he took it.
So I'm gonna kind of impromptu here on this one, and I'm gonna put Levi Colwill. And here's my hipster pick on this one. So 2 seasons ago, Levi Cole was playing in the championship with Huddersfield. Last season, he was on loan at Brighton, who got 6th place. Levi getting us to 6th place. But why I say he's most improved is he is de facto proven that he can play at this level and be a long-term stalwart for Chelsea. And I think because of that, knowing we have a left-footed center back who can flex in a back three, or and even played some left back at the beginning of the season, I am good on Levi. We just need him healthy. That was his biggest thing. But I think for me, having him go from Huddersfield to Brighton to Chelsea within 3 seasons is pretty significant. And I wanted to give him a little shout out on that one. The next one we had was comeback player of the year. Again, a little bit tricky when not many players came back this season. So Nick, I know this is a little bit of a favorite player for yours for a while, but who did you run with?
I went with Trev. I mean, obviously, there's been so much up and down with him. He's been injured a lot of the last 2 seasons, and then when he played last year, I think really struggled in under Potter's system. And again, I just take like Brighton away last year versus Brighton away this year. We're completely different story. He looked like a completely different player with a ton of confidence. I think we were unbeaten when he played or something to that effect this year. Had an incredible record when he was in there. I think he ended the season as CB1 for me when he wasn't even in the running at the beginning of the season. Like he played those preseason matches, got hurt, and then we didn't really see him for a bit. But you take the way that he played right back, right center back, anywhere he was required, and did it confidently. Was almost always at like a 7 out of 10, if not higher. I just everyone knows my love for Trev. This is probably a incredibly biased homer pick here, and that's okay. These are our awards. Make your own awards at home if you'd like.
10 matches played, just shy of 1,000 minutes with a goal. A great goal, by the way. That was
against
awesome.
Spurs.
Yes. I went with Cucurella just to be different, but I'm also not convinced that an inverted wingback in possession saves his future. So there you go. A bit of a toss-up on that one. And then Dan, lastly with you.
Look, I went Conor Gallagher because season over season, really impressive performance. I mean, look at the fact that he had over 2,000 minutes last season and 4 goal contributions after being at Palace and having 13 goal contributions. He ended up picking up 14 cards. He's able to decrease that in the same time doubling his minutes contributed. So really, really kind of nice. I think just in general, like season over season, picks up the captaincy, as Nick talked about earlier in the most improved period. I think it was just like, hey, he went from having an incredible loan to having a really rough time. A lot of players at Chelsea did last season, but I think he came in with a high level of expectation last season. I don't think many fans felt like he executed fully against this. And I think this season, because the expectation was a little lower, he not only hit it, I think he smashed it out of the park. So to me, Conor Gallagher, comeback player of the year.
Remember, most minutes played in the season, 37 matches played, 37 starts, 3,100 minutes. His 12 goals and assists equaled Raheem Sterling's. And one of those is an attacker.
And 16 goals and assists, all competitions, 7 and 9, which is better than his Crystal Palace season.
And remind me of the best ability again, Dan.
I think begins with a veil. Availability?
Yeah, that is correct. He's available all the fucking time. You need him to play, he'll play. I think we rested him once in the league, and then he had to come on as a sub in the second half. So we couldn't live without him. And now the sporting directors are going to try to, which is fucking terrifying.
Yeah. All right. Best transfer business, right? We've got, I mean, the more outgoings than ingoings. So I'll be interested to see how you guys go with this. The listeners said overwhelmingly Cole Palmer, which I think makes a lot of sense. Dan, you aligned. Again, Nick, you threw out Nico as maybe an alternate besides the most obvious.
Yeah, the answer is Cole Palmer. Okay, like even if we had signed him for 120 million, the return was there, and would have been great in any number. But if you have to go with someone other than Cole, just for the sake of argument, Nico Jackson, 23 goals and assists, all comps, had to stay healthy all season. Did stay healthy all season. Obviously, didn't have a whole lot of help in the striker role. went out wide a couple times, looked pretty good there, gave Kyle Walker a hell of a time multiple times this season. So yeah, was really, really pleased with him at the end. And I think, hopefully he kicks on from here.
Again, like Cole getting, I hate like skipping over him, like we are, because it's just so obvious. But like the recognition he's getting in the Premier League, and like outside of Holland having a massive game at the end, was neck and neck with him for the Golden Boot when we were mid-table and they were in a title race. So definitely not to take any shine whatsoever away from Cole Palmer this season, because it was incredible.
Most goal contributions in all of the Premier League, Cole Palmer. So, he is top dog. And I think, like, again, he leaves this season in the stratosphere compared to where he started when he was kind of an unknown quantity. So a lot of these awards were just looking for something a little bit different. Otherwise, it would just be like, and Cole Palmer wins again. Hooray.
And look, we know he doesn't love the publicity, so he would get bored of it. I put Kai to Arsenal, raise funds to buy better players. Again, I think this one was huge. To get the fee that we did was damn near what we paid for him originally. You get his high wages off the books, and to be quite honest, we improved the squad by shifting him on. Again, I'm not going to say that Kai is a bad player and things like that, because we were all there in Porto when he scored the Champions League winning goal, and I will always remember that and have warm feelings towards him. At this point in Chelsea's journey, this was a great move, I think, for both sides. So I think this was probably our best transfer business. It opened up a huge spot in the team for players to step into that void and fill. So the worst transfer business, though, was interesting. I like looking back at the last year's things. We had Aubameyang, we had Cucurella, and we had Ziyech's loan getting botched at the last day of the transfer window. A little bit different this season. And Dan, it seems like it's coming down mainly to like high potential signings that just didn't play any minutes. Who did you go with?
I went with Lavia. So the listeners went 23% with Sanchez, 21% with Lavia. So those two purchases making up not necessarily a majority, but at least a plurality of the vote that came in. It felt surplus to requirements, right? Like we ended up having to try to figure out how to accommodate Enzo and Gallagher and Caicedo, and they weren't good at the same time. And then we had to try to figure out how to get our attackers going around that. And we didn't always have our defense kind of set right. And then Lavia didn't actually play the majority of the season, didn't feature outside of like less than half of a quarter of a match. And so like it just really was disastrous. And I think some of that you can't know and can't necessarily plan for somebody to get injury. And so like I don't want to knock him too hard on it, but I think where the context is that for the amount you paid for him, around 62 million euros, as you head into this summer and have to look to sell, as have heard from our friend Matt, we heard from our friend Maz, you heard from every report that we have to sell players to make sure that we meet our end of the year books looking really good. That money could have been used to retain Chalobah, could have retained Gallagher, could have kept more of the squad together of pieces that were helping push us forward and stabilizing, or you could have used that to reinforce in areas that really struggled, like the Olise deal that came down to not happening. Like, I don't know. It feels as if that one could come good at some point in the future. I just feel like it definitely looks the oddest of all of the deals we conducted of last summer now.
So to be fair, on paper, when we signed him, it didn't make sense, right? Like not using 2020 as hindsight, you're saying in the moment, didn't feel like we needed him. Ogochukwu was already there, things of that nature, because obviously we could have never predicted him literally never featuring. But
correct.
Okay, I get that, because in hindsight, it's like, well, it's not knock on the player. It's like that was not an area of priority for the team at the time. Got it. Nick, maybe you want to talk about Sanchez a little bit. You had him as an option. So did the listeners. Why Sanchez?
Because you gave him a fucking 7-year deal. Why? This is a guy who was second string at Brighton who needed out. And, what wasn't good enough there wasn't good enough here. And now he's on your books for however long, 6-7 years, 6 more years after this year, I suppose. Why? He was never going to be good enough. And it's really not a knock on him as much as it is the business of it. I get splitting the amortization over a number of transfers and all that sort of stuff and all the gamesmanship that we played. But like, this was a 20 million pound transfer. Do we really need to split that into 7? Do we really need to put 2 or 3 million on the books every single year and give him a contract when he's probably gonna ride the pine for a little bit or a lot of it? I just, it makes no sense. I mean, I think Dan's right with Lavia because I think there's too many more implications there. You also look at Enzo's injury at the end of the season too. Like, if Lavia was there to spare him some minutes this year, would have been that bad? I don't know. Who knows? But yeah, Sanchez is mind boggling to me still.
I think so. My thought experiment was Keppa because that failed, but it was a bit of a gamble. And I think in the moment you're like, look, we're going to move him so we can free this up. I think that that's going to end up failing, and we're now going to have to
Yeah.
deal with the Keppa situation now. But I also don't know what a better solution would have been. So I think I'm going to be a little bit harsh here and say Disasi, because again, like in the moment, did we need? Is he a real upgrade? He's 25, so he's not even that sub 23 category. I'm not saying he's cooked. It's just because he had some good performances. He even played right back for some matches, but at the end of the day, is our defense better with Disasi in it? I don't know. And so I'm going to kind of leave that one out there to say, I felt like a lot of the players we signed are pretty good, but like, I don't know if Disasi really came in and like solidified our team to be a lot better. And I love, we love that we talked about like, oh, him and Benoit played together. Like it's going to just click and things. Well, Benoit did not even play, so it
No.
didn't matter. So we should have thought like, hey, can Disasi perform next to Levi, to Thiago, to Trev, all these different things. I don't know. I didn't really see it for me, unfortunately.
The only thing I would say on Disasi is, one, he was available for a majority of the season, so that was a victory in and of itself. 2, if Trev doesn't get hurt in preseason, we probably don't need him. I think that's a boon because Thiago clearly couldn't play every match this year, and Fofana got hurt in preseason, and so I think your plan A went out the window very fucking quickly in the summer. And so I think it's a little harsh on Disasi, to be honest with you, to put him in the worst. But I also, like, when we signed him, I was like, why?
Yeah. Again, I'm not saying he's a bad person or player. It's just more at the time, was that the one we needed? And again, I'm just kind of like, all right, like maybe. So, all right, armband or a future captain. So I got to caveat this because I just look at Connor as the captain, right? So I did not put him. And I see the listeners had him at 63%. And in hindsight, like, hey, maybe that makes sense because technically it's Reese then Chilwell. Like on paper, captain, vice captain. I don't know, right? Like I'm going with Nkunku, international player for France, experienced. I think he could carry the team on his shoulders without flinching. But Dan, you're going to go for a player. I don't know. Is this next year? Is this in the next 5 years? Like, what are you thinking?
So that they could be a future captain, and I think the way that we frame this in the past couple seasons is that, like, hey, they have the ability and availability and all those things to be our captain, right? And like some of us, talked about players like, I think you and Nick both at the end of last season were like, hey, yeah, it's Reece James. And the big problem with Reece James is when you only feature in 400 minutes across the entirety of a season in the Premier League, and your vice captain only features in 756 minutes across a 38 game campaign. And you have to go to who's next. And it would be Conor Gallagher, but I'm also operating under the assumption that we're going to sell Conor Gallagher. And so in that case, if we're selling Conor Gallagher, and if Ben Chilwell can't get back to be healthy as often as he should, as Reece James hopefully is healthier next season, but in a world where you have to just take the data that's in front of you and understand that Reece James is not going to play every game, Ben Chilwell is not going to play every game, who's the next person I'm going to? I'm going to Cole Palmer. Like, I think that he is a stud. I think he has the mentality. He doesn't give a shit about anything. He's a completely cool as a cucumber. He does some shithouse things that are great. Like, I love it. I would love for him to be that kind of like third choice captain next season, assuming he would also get an opportunity to probably be captain for at least 10 or more games, if that's the case.
Yeah, I would just say this. I love Reece James. I think he's obviously one of our top players when healthy hasn't been healthy in 3 years, guys. I mean, it. I think he's one injured season away from career jeopardy. That's kind of where we are right now. He's still young; he could still turn it around, but he's entering into the prime of his career and played 7 matches this year, and then got 2 red cards in those matches. I mean, it's asinine. So I have huge doubts over that right now. That experiment. Um, Obviously, Connor would be my pick, but I agree with Dan. I'm operating under the auspices that he's going to be sold. Trev's going to be sold. Maybe an experienced transfer in. I don't see a ton of leaders in this team right now at all, and I think that's where the sporting directors and their philosophy and all this stuff goes to shit for me. Is that you lose Thiago Silva this year, Reece James not available, Ben Chilwell not available, Connor Gallagher going to be sold, Trev Chalobah going to be sold. Those are your leaders, I guess. Who else? Enzo?
Maybe, right? Like Enzo, maybe. I think he's a
Maybe.
vocal leader, which is good. Again, that's why I think, I don't know, Cole Palmer's not a vocal leader, but he will lead by presence. So it just kind of depends also what you need from a leader. Like at different times, you need different things where the team are at. And so it's thin. All right. What about the next one we've got here? So we've got the 1953 8-1 tribute to when Chelsea lost to Wolves, aka worst loss of the season. For me, it was losing to Liverpool in the Carabao Cup final, right? Extra time. They were an extremely weakened, not in great form side. We had some momentum. Losing the cup final that way was hard. Also, the Klopp um, retirement parade, not retirement, but you know what I mean. Uh, Obviously, I think Nick, everybody went with the 5-0 to Arsenal because that was just the worst. But thankfully, you pivoted and tried to throw in another one to remind us about another opportunity that we sucked.
Yeah, the 60% of our listeners said the 5-0 to Arsenal, and frankly, they know where my heart is on that. Like that's the one. So just for a different take, the 4-2 at home to Wolves felt like the end times for Poch to me. Like that, it was a really really toxic atmosphere, and I was like, man, the stadium's turned on him, the stadium's turned on the players, it's turned on everything. Like the fact they rallied from that was good, but that was a pretty terrible, because we just lost to him a couple weeks before that too. Is we reached kind of the end of our first cycle and snake drafted our way back to Wolves again, and got pummeled at home, and we were pretty decent at home this year, so to get shell shocked like that was no bueno.
Well, obviously, yeah, Dan, you had the Arsenal 5-0, so I think we can just let that sit for what it is. But then we've got the opposite, the hey yo, like best win, like when Chelsea beat Villa and Wigan 8-0. Man, those Carlo years were fun, weren't they? I maybe took the easy one, Everton 6-0. Or I tell you what, I felt really good watching us beat Spurs 2-0 towards the end of the season. So anytime you pummel a team is always fun because I love watching Pickford pick the ball out of his net 6 times. Anyways, Dan, what about you?
Look, I think it was United 3-4 to Chelsea. I mean, that was what the listeners shows as well, 31%. That was a really fun way. Like, look, was it enjoyable throughout the entirety of the game? No. Did I feel really great at the end when we won? Yes. So, yeah, that to me was a really, really good win, particularly after like getting just unfortunately like punching through draws for like multiple seasons in a row. It was nice to get a win. It was like this was the culmination of multiple seasons of frustration finally getting eroded and washed away.
I hated that one. So I'm glad you took that to represent it because it wasn't going to be me. Nick, you had another good one.
Chelsea 5, West Ham 0, pummeling a David Moyes team that has historically frustrated the absolute hell out of us was joyful. Watching them just quit was enjoyable. And yeah, toodaloo to that whole thought experiment.
All right. The next one we have is the need to see more, aka the jury's still out on these players. Um, Obviously, we have a lot of young players. Not a lot of minutes were there. So, I mean, Nick, you might have a second season running with this one.
Yeah, I mean, So I had Fafana last year. Obviously, we need to see more of him. I mean, he wasn't available at all, so I'll take it a little easy on him. Mudrick has a lot of work to do, man. He's tactically not there. The team stopped passing him the ball at the end of the season. Batty Shield in particular just didn't use him as an outlet. We became so right hand dominant that this club is begging for a left winger who can emulate what Cole Palmer and even Madueke did on the right at the end of the year, which is driving behind, cross balls back, make sure that you're getting the striker involved, interchange. Mudrick has a long, long, long way to go. I was happy that he got the goals that he did this season, but it was way too shaky.
Yeah, I mean, very fair. Dan, that's who you had last season. So changing up this season.
Yeah, I think it's actually Madueke, this one. I think so I think he, had showed a little bit at the end of the season. I think getting an opportunity for more starts, more minutes, potentially next season. My only fear is that I actually think like an on book value, he is probably one of the, out of the attackers that might get sold, one who has extremely high wages and is going to be extremely difficult to move in Raheem Sterling, one that is on a long contract and has no data yet to support anyone coming in for him at any value relative to what Chelsea paid in Mykhailo Mudryk, and Noni Madueke, who some Premier League clubs would probably come in for him at a rate where Chelsea would not be making a book loss on him. I unfortunately could see him departing this summer. And that is not to say that I want to see that happen necessarily. But I think with all of the work that we're doing to, get ready with Estevo and get ready with Kendry and all these others and potentially still being in for Elise, like there could be a casualty amongst our attacking core. And I do think Madueke might be that individual. But I do think there's some of the like need for consistency, even though like, again, had 7 goal contributions across 1,000 minutes, like promising, not always super consistent. It would be good to see more. Will he be here next season? I don't even know though.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Look, I was a bit grumpy on this one. I said half the team, right? Like Benoit, big one. I think we're all pretty high on him last season. Really disappointing this season, and also not really available. Kind of felt like he was hiding at times. But again, Madueke, Mudryk, even Carnes a little bit. Disasi. I put half any and all attackers last season. There's still a big core. But I think this goes back to recruitment policy. You're picking up young, unproven players and then putting them in a high pressure environment, being like, perform at a high level. That's hard. And that goes back to the sporting directors to me. So
I almost had Enzo for mine, guys.
Look, that was Matt Loss, obviously, right? Like we talked him all season.
The reason I didn't is because hernias are no fucking joke. And if he was that limited by a hernia, like I will give him the pass this year to get healthy, but good Lord, we need a lot more.
Yeah. Master of the Dark Arts Award. This used to be a lot easier. It's getting tougher the last couple seasons. I mean, I look at what we had last year. Nick, you even said NA. Dan, you said Havertz, I guess, question mark. And I said Reese, but no one was convinced by any of those. And I think we're there again this season.
Per match, Reese is doing great.
Per match, per minutes, not wrong.
I don't think if you pick up a red, you're necessarily a master of anything. I think it's your master of disaster is the only thing that you're mastering.
Diego Costa wrote the playbook on this, and we're just nowhere near it. So, anyways, are any of you guys convicted on yours?
I am.
All right.
I think that the reason I'm saying this is because he didn't get his 10th until he had passed the deadline for it to matter. Nico Jackson, hear me out, okay?
I think I've brought you around on this because I was trying to convince you of this point multiple times in the season that he had developed.
But I have the full sample size now, Dan. Okay, so if you convince me, I'll give you a half credit on this one. I think that beginning of the season really struggled to understand how to get away with stuff. End of the season, started doing little things, little shithouse things off the ball, making sure that like he wasn't getting caught or like it wasn't so egregious that he was going to pick up a card for it. That to me, it's the needle that really gets you involved here. Dan loved when he celebrated wasn't on the field and got a yellow card for celebrating off the bench.
So good.
That that was not my favorite moment. But you know what? I came around on Nico. So credit to you, Dan, for maybe inspiring me. But I think he just has a little bit of edge to him that I like.
I mean, that was good, and I think that is a good candidate for it. I think it has to be Conor Gallagher though, because he absolutely rides a fine line in a lot of
Connor tackle.
matches for his tackles. He is a cruncher in every way, shape, or form. He only managed 9 cards this season across 3,100 Premier League minutes. He had 11
Yeah.
last season in 1,600 minutes. So very much getting a season over season improvement in that regard, and doing it as the captain for a lot of those matches, which I think makes it more difficult at times because you are drawing a little bit more attention. So I think it had to be Connor. The listeners gave it to Kukurea at 27%. I think it's also a fun shout because he's done some really fun stuff. Not always the smartest, but fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think Enzo and Caicedo just because they love a tackle, a little South American flair. But again, I'm not, Caicedo ended up, I think, with the most cautions on the team, so there's not too much dark art there. It's pretty clear and obvious. Goal of the season, some a little bit more exciting, right? Um, I like that we had some options. This is
Yes.
a bit of a Cole Palmer situation, though, with Caicedo versus Bournemouth at the end of the season. The listeners snagged that at 54%. Stole Dan's argument. But there was at least two other kind of mazy give and go ones that we had. Nick, I'll let you lead.
Yeah, Cole Palmer's first goal against Everton, the interchange with, I think it was Connor to him to Nico, Nico back to him, nutmeg involved, Techers involved, wonderful finish involved, and it beat your boy Pickford, Brandon,
100%.
which I know that you little extra credit sprinkle on there for you. I mean, it was one of those. It's not an Eden Hazard goal where it's just pure individual brilliance, like we were. I think we got so accustomed to seeing. But it was one of those that made me want to like get out of my chair, and that's how I will grade that. Does it make me get out of my chair?
Yeah, I had that with Madueke. And granted, there's a championship team against Leicester in the FA Cup, but they're now a Premier League team. So maybe a little bit of caveat there. Again, a windy run, great techers, reminding me of Joe Cole, a little bit of help on the deflection to just bring the shot down. But like that was what we thought we were getting with Madueke and proved that he has that. Dan, a special shout out though to Mudrik's Schross versus Arsenal. I mean, love that.
Ooh,
Love that. Celebrated it with
Yeah.
almost a Ronaldo celebration.
That was a good one. I mean, look, I'm gonna like take umbrage with the fact that Garnacho's goal won the Premier League's goal of the season because Caicedo's very much the goal of the season. I'm sorry, we've seen people do the overheads before. That Caicedo one was super special. So you know what? Like, f off, fan vote. You got it wrong. You got it wrong, Premier League.
Yeah,
End of.
no doubt about that. What about a moment that made you laugh? Laugh, cry, laugh, happy. I mean, there's a lot of different laughs, I think, at this season. Um, but I'll go ahead and let you tip it off, Dan.
Well, Nick may have spoiled it earlier, but I think Nico Jackson not being on the pitch and then picking up a yellow card for participating and running effectively half of the pitch to participate in the goal celebration for Enzo's goal against Crystal Palace. Pretty fantastic. Like that's quite the achievement to have gone have to improve your discipline so much and then to find yourself carded when you actually aren't on the pitch anymore. That's real effort. Like that is it might actually be, we might have to name this the Nico Jackson Tribute Award next season, is the moment that make you laugh.
yeah. I mean, well, Nico features in mine, but I think we all remember 2023, 2024, first 3 months of the season, champion Tottenham Hotspur. Don't you guys? Do you remember when they were in first place talking all that shit? And then we just went in there. They lost their collective fucking mind. And then we won 4-1 off some hilarious goals against the highest, stupidest line in all of football. That was good. The DVDs were freshly pressed. I think you'll all remember those moments. And I hope they get to cherish that. We just rocked up and destroyed them. And it was one of those things where I was like, at that point in the season, we were off to a really slow start. I was like, we lose this could get pretty ugly for everyone involved. you left that game feeling like, all right, we're gonna be fine.
Yeah, I didn't have a good one either. Obviously, I think, you know, doing the double over Spurs was phenomenal. I just put VAR because I'll be honest, if there's one thing I laughed at throughout the entire season, it was VAR. Right. And it was funny laughs like when it would screw over the other team, or I just laugh in kind of disbelief throughout the season. So I'm not going to try to open that one, but it was definitely one of those things that I just laughed at all season. And usually it was not to our benefit. Thinking of Austin Villa's could have been winner at the end, which, man, those extra 2 points would have been valuable.
Neat. That would have been really neat.
Yeah. All right. Well, last one we've got is shithouse moment of the season. Again, it's hard to have a shithouse moment of the season when you don't have a big shithouse player of the season or master of the dark arts, but we'll pull this one together, right? I think we've got something that we can play with here. Nick, chewing on this one a little bit. What'd you come up with?
Yeah, I was trying to think back because this is like I do this every week, so I think I lost the forest through the trees a little bit here. So if you guys have them or you start to recall them, please bring them in. I'm sure I'll misremember one of these. I think the dumbest thing that happened, or the most shithouse thing that happened, was us against Everton. The stupid Madueke v. Jackson, who's going to take the penalty? Oh, wait, none of you are. Conor Gallagher goes in and gives the ball back to deservingly Cole Palmer, who's on a 4-goal performance in that game. It was just the dumbest and most shithouse thing that I think happened in a season. And it really sums up our 2023-2024 season. Funny and frustrating.
Well, yeah, not wrong with that one whatsoever. I think I was a little tongue in cheek and just saying neither captain featuring. Like, that's pretty shithouse. The fact that we named not only a captain but a vice captain and then didn't play. That's pretty cheeky. That's pretty shithouse if you ask me. Look, there's a lot in here. All right, and we appreciate all of you.
You're gonna skip over Dan? Come on, dog.
Yeah, we can go with Dan, I guess.
Wow. Yeah. So look, this was a fun moment when Cole Palmer was like, "Hey, I'm going to go back into this huddle of Man City players who are discussing what they're going to do with this free kick and involve myself in the conversation," and not immediately getting dismissed. You know, he's next to Ruben Diaz. He's standing next to Bernardo Silva. They don't immediately dismiss him. It's only Erling Haaland who comes over and is like, "Well, wait a minute. What the fuck are you still doing here? Like, you need to go." And then Jack Grealish has like "Wait a minute. Oh, you were here?" Like, like this like dazed look in his eyes.
Hey,
That's great.
fellas. How are you guys doing? Been a while.
Again, it's showing off some potential captain chutzpah there that was much enjoyed.
All right.
2 to 3 times a season, he can be our secret agent. I like it. All right. Well, hey, listeners, we appreciate that. A bit long, but the most important thing was getting your participation to give us something to think about. Let us know on social which ones we bombed and which ones we absolutely nailed. Again, this could have been the Cole Palmer Award show, but we tried to add a little bit of variety because, look, there were some bright spots throughout the season. It wasn't all doom and gloom. Moments of individual brilliance, moments of a team collective, although it was pretty difficult. So I personally am most interested in hearing owners, managers, and kind of club overall, your opinions. So again, Discord is a great place. Otherwise, hit us up on the socials to get involved. We're going to be back with another episode rating all of the players top to bottom, numbers for everybody, no punts. We promise it'll be a good one. So until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.